Turn it on.
Where's the on and off button? I don't see it.
That's good.
Oh, you're not running.
All right. Okay, go. That's going to run up. 5 minutes.
Where's the on and off button? Okay, she's coming up.
We're all very stupid here.
How's it going?
Go ahead and put it on the lectern. Leave it on.
Okay. Oh, put it on the
Up there.
plate. I'm gonna turn off the air conditioners. Or should I?
They're on auto. I mean, they're going on and off. They're sensing the
Yeah,
temperature.
it's on and off. You turn it on.
I know. I think because it's right at
Well,
a
it's got a
certain.
thermostat,
It's right
so-
at a certain temperature.
Yeah, it's.
You think it's fine?
I mean, let's turn it back on again. Because once the speaker speaks, we need to shut it off.
You have to take a picture of me and roll.
Hello? Over there, I'll take one.
And then I talk to you. I'm still president of the board. You and I are talking.
You try it? It's working.
I had it turned off, so I turned it off.
Yeah,
it's
no, I'm talking about the remote control with the
Yeah,
output.
there was the on button's on the side.
Oh.
None of us can see that because
It's really small.
we're all very. She's older than I am. That's, you know.
Matter if you're wearing your glasses.
Well, yeah.
I do.
Is it okay if I eat some of the food, or should I?
Yes, please do. Because there'll be extra, and we don't want to. It's fine. See that video? How about on the side? Okay, I won't go far.
Dr. Dieter, as one of the presenters, we have a reserved seat for you.
Then can I eat while I'm sitting
Oh,
there?
yeah, absolutely. Is this okay for you?
Yeah.
Okay.
University of Chicago Space Historian. Or the space medicine side of things. That's my specialty. You hear all that? Very nice to meet you.
Oh, do I need that?
No, I only have my seat, my glasses.
I gotta find Robert.
What is that?
That's 3 books for him, Dr. Golden
To sign?
to sign.
Okay. Do you want me to take care of it for now for you?
Yeah, why don't you put it on the table or something out
Okay,
there?
I will. On the library table?
As the master certificate here.
Oh, you can keep them in the box. Sure, keep them in the box. It's easier to carry them.
That's all right.
So you have a pen later?
I have one in my pocket. You want it?
Yeah. Or maybe you can pass it.
Here you go.
You don't have fancy pen?
Isn't that pretty fancy? It writes.
Where do you sit?
I'm gonna sit at the, right there. Where do you want me to sit? Okay. 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 Okay.
Oh, go ahead.
Everyone, can you hear me okay, Steve? Is this working?
Turn it on.
Hello, is this working now? Great, thank you so much. Thank you all so much for coming tonight to our opening reception of Health in Space, Daring to Explore at the International Museum of Surgical Science. We're pleased to have so many fantastic speakers tonight. And I just wanted to tell you a little bit about the exhibit that you'll see on the 4th floor of the museum. Health in Space, Daring to Explore was developed by the Canada Aviation and Space Museum, one of 3 museums under Ingenium, Canada's Museums of Science and Innovation, in collaboration with the Canadian Space Agency. In addition to the traveling exhibit, we have opened a new exhibition called New Technologies in Space Medicine with US partners. This exhibition was created in partnership with NASA, Virtual Incision, Axiom Space, the Beckman Institute for Advanced Science and Technology, the Translational Research Institute for Space Health, and the Japanese Culture Center. I'd also like to take this time to thank our leading sponsor, the Museums of Quinte. The Museums of Quinte are coming to a site on the Bay of Quinte in southern Ontario between Toronto and Montreal. The site will consist of a campus of 6 distinct museums plus a large botanic garden. The technology used in gaming and practical education will provide dynamic learning experiences about medicine, space, science, and much more. And we have some pamphlets about this organization on the library table in the library behind you. And I think that our representatives, Peter, would also like to say a few words about the museums.
Thank you. Actually, he just said all that I wanted to say, except that we do have pamphlets which I've been keeping a couple in my pocket. And if you don't have one, if you don't talk to me, you'll find them on the table. We are so excited to hear about this, about the Canadian connection and the Canadian-U.S. cooperation. It's terrific. And I'm very much looking forward to hearing you guys. Any people?
Thank you so much. Now I'm pleased to present our Master of Ceremonies from the museum, Mr. Max Downham, the Executive Director of the International College of Surgeons. The museum is a division of the International College of Surgeons.
Thank you very much, Michelle. Let me say a word about Michelle. She is a very special lady, and her title here is the Manager of Exhibitions and Development. She's been with the IMSS, International Museum of Surgical Science, for about 8 years. She has a bachelor's in she has a bachelor's of museology from Southern Illinois University and a master's in art history from Oklahoma State University. She manages all the grant writing and history from the Oklahoma State University, or from the organization, and she's responsible for developing and managing the museum's exhibition schedule. So I'll stop reading and say that Michelle is a very special lady, and kudos to you for putting this together. We appreciate it greatly. Also wish to identify Jennifer Tron, who is the Chief Financial Officer here, and she's works with me in managing the museum overall. So she's a very special lady, and so Jennifer, thank you so much as well. We have other staff out in the hallway. Christine Heinz, I don't know if she's in here or not, but we do have other staff that are all terrific. And so I thank and give a special commendation to the staff. A word about the museum. This building was put together and built in 1917. The museum has been in existence since 1954, about 70 years. If you take a walk, as Dr. Golden indicated to me when we arrived, from North Michigan Avenue, you can have a nice walk in good weather, and you can see in a short period of time, first of all, a landmark architectural building, National, State of Illinois, Chicago. Also artifacts, as well as the murals, which are unique, and these statues are unique to this museum. Murals were done by Count Orvolo of Italy in 1954, and the statutes by Chastain and Lake in that same general period of time. So this museum has been in business for about 70 years, and we are very honored and very humbled to have you here to exhibit this interest in what we do. And I want to point out then members, Dr. Raymond Dieter, who will speak a little bit later, who's the chair of the board of the International Museum of Surgical Science. And then there are other board members here, and I don't know if I can spot them, but Cheryl Bury Michaels, there you are, and Dr. John Messick, right there, and Dr. George Kusick, and Miss Barbara Bancroft, right there. And so if I missed anyone, which I sometimes do, please raise your hand and correct me. So a word, we are privileged and we are humbled and very fortunate to have you here. And so we have a number of speakers, the first of which, of whom is Madeline, the Consul General of Canada in Chicago, Madeline McQueer, who is with us. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about the Consul General's background. She is a recognized expert in leadership, corporate credit administration, credit risk and operations, credit enhancement, and international trade. Over the course of her career, Ms. McQueer has held global executive positions for companies in diverse sectors of the economy, including agri-food, technology, software, communications, pulp and paper, and personal care. Prior to her appointment as Consul General, Ms. McQueer was the corporate credit chief at Domtar Corporation, providing oversight and support for credit risk management on a global scale. At Domtar, she implemented innovative, proven strategies and deployed efficient credit structures across the Americas and in Europe, Asia, and the Middle East. A seasoned board director, Ms. McQueer, experience in corporate governance spans over 25 years of active involvement on boards, committees of numerous organizations into cultural, health, education, and business sectors. She has been a board member of Investissement Quebec, a member of the board of the University of Montreal, and an expert panel member of the Canadian Center for the Purpose of the Corporation. As a highly sought-after speaker on a global scale, Ms. McQueer is a recurring keynote guest at major global conferences in her field, including the Association of International Credit and Trade Finance Professionals, the Finance, Credit and International Business Association, and the Credit Institute of Canada. Additionally, she offers articles that are published in specialized global credit magazines. A co-founder of the Excellence Quebec initiative, she actively works to support the challenges of inclusion, diversity, equality, and accessibility by integrating promising young leaders into the management, finance, and governance in communities. Ms. Pierre holds a director's education program diploma in governance from the Blackman School of Management at the University of Toronto, as well as the Institute of Corporate Directors, a mini MBA from the McGill Executive Institute, and a certificate in finance from HEC Montreal, jointly with the Credit Institute of Canada. Ms. McQueer is a member of the Order of Canada. So, Consul General, I present you.
Perfect. Thank you for the opportunity to speak tonight on the occasion of the opening of this wonderful exhibition created by the Canadian Aviation and Space Museum. We are thrilled that the International Museum of Surgical Science has brought Health in Space to Chicago. It explores the cutting-edge medical research being conducted on the International Space Station. Canada and Canadians have long played a role in space science and investigation. The first magnetic observatory was established at the University of Toronto in 1839. It was used to investigate fluctuations in the Earth's magnetic field, study meteorological models, and make calculations that led to worldwide standardization of time through the creation of time zones. In 1957, Canada and the United States built Churchill Research Range in northern Manitoba. It launched suborbital sounding rockets that probed the Earth's upper atmosphere for more than 30 years. More than 3,500 were launched from Churchill. Canada became the third spacefaring country in the world after the United States and the Soviet Union in 1962 with the launch of the Alouette 1 satellite. Development of the satellite came by way of an invitation from a newly created organization called NASA. It was the start of international collaboration in the budding satellite program. Canada has a long history of providing the technology that has aided in the exploration of the final frontier. The landing gear of the Apollo 11 lunar module was built by Aerospace in our own province of Quebec, my own province of Quebec in Canada. The Eagle would not have landed without Canada. One of our most recognized technical contribution is the Canadarm. I'm sure you've all heard about it. As NASA faced the challenge of building a tool to function flawlessly in space with the dexterity of a human arm, it awarded Canada the responsibility of designing, developing, and building the system. The first Canadarm launched aboard the Space Shuttle Columbia in 1981. For over 30 years, the series of Canadarms on the space shuttles helped send satellites into orbit and capture them for repair. It aided in the assembly of the International Space Station. It supported astronauts during spacewalk, field astronauts experiences with IMAX cameras, and inspected the shuttle protection system for safe travel and return. Today, the newest generation of Canadarms lend a helping hand to space station maintenance, move supplies, and perform cosmic catches. Aboard the International Space Station, scientific exploration is looking inward for improving human health and medical science. This excellent exhibit you are seeing tonight will introduce you to Canada's neuroarm, the world's first robot capable of performing surgery inside MRI machines. Think of it as the offspring of Canadarm, bringing the lessons learned in space down to Earth and saving human lives in the process. Current Canadian experiments on the space station include work in the field of eye health, vascular aging, and brain and bone health. The IIS program connects many nations and their greatest minds to learn about the universe around us, the universe inside us. Canada is proud to be part of this international consortium and is looking forward to our next step. When humans return to the moon on Artemis 2 with Canadian astronaut Jeremy Hansen aboard the mission. Like in many other areas, Canada-US cooperation in space research benefits both our countries. We are stronger when we work together. Thank you again for your invitation to tonight's program and for the opportunity to speak.
Consul General, I hope that you will bring many Canadians to this exhibit. Thank you very much. I next had the pleasure of introducing to you Dr. Jordan Bim, space historian, University of Chicago, authority report on the exhibit. Dr. Jordan Bim is a historian of science, technology, and medicine focused on the human and biological aspects of space exploration. His forthcoming book, Anticipating the Astronaut, examines the surprising history of the pre-NASA space medicine test subjects, contributing to early visions of an ideal spacefaring body, including push-button soldiers, high-altitude indigenous people, mountaineers, women pilots, and animals. His current project, quote, Putting Mars in a Jar, unquote, recovers the forgotten military origin of astrobiology, the study of potential extraterrestrial life, through a history of the U.S. Air Force life on Mars simulations in the 1950s. He holds a PhD in Science and Technology Studies from the York University in Toronto, and was most recently a postdoctoral fellow at Princeton University. He holds a Daniel and Florence Guggenheim Fellowship at the Smithsonian National Air and Space Museum in Washington, D.C. The prestigious fellowship provides opportunity to work with the National Air and Space Museum's curators and collections to further his project about the military origin of astrobiology, the search for life in the cosmos, and Mars environmental simulators called Mars Jars. So Dr. Bim, it's my pleasure to present you to the audience. Thank you.
Okay, hi everybody. I'm Dr. Jordan Bim, a historian of space exploration and professor of science communication here in Chicago, at the University of Chicago. As was mentioned, I wrote my PhD dissertation on the history of American space medicine called Anticipating the Astronaut. It'll be out in book form next year on the MIT Press. And even though I've lived and worked here in Chicago for 4 years, I'm originally from Toronto, Canada, proud Canadian. And in 2017, I served as the background researcher for this exhibit, which I'm so happy has finally made its way from Ottawa here to Chicago. This evening, I'm going to talk a little bit about the history of space medicine. My goal is to provide you with a little bit of history and context to enhance your experience of the exhibit we're about to see. First, I'll give you a general overview of the history of space medicine and how it developed here in the United States. And then I will turn to the Canadian connection, and I'll tell you the surprising story of how Canada came to specialize in space medicine. So first, what is space medicine? Space medicine is the field devoted to the health and safety of astronauts. Space medicine covers everything from basic research into the limits and capabilities of the human body in space, to applying this research to the selection, training, and care of astronauts before, during, and after their missions. Now, to conjure a picture in your mind of space medicine, all you have to do is think about your favorite movie about space exploration. Maybe it's The Right Stuff, like I've got up here, or Apollo 13, or perhaps First Man. There's usually a scene near the beginning of the film, before they go to space, where astronaut hopefuls are being examined by doctors. You see them undergo exhaustive medical examinations, grueling stress tests, and disorienting simulations, all to determine if they are fit for the rigors of spaceflight. This is the world of space medicine. Now, most people think that space medicine got its start at NASA and is a product of the space race in the 1960s. The field is usually understood as a post-Sputnik science. On October 4th, 1957, the Soviet Union launched Sputnik, the world's first artificial satellite. This event ignited the Cold War's space race and created an urgent political crisis in the United States about the status of US science and technology. And this compelled the US Congress to quickly create NASA over the summer of 1958. When NASA began operations in October 1958, one of the agency's first goals was to put a human in space, an effort called Project Mercury. To do this, NASA needed astronauts, and just a few months later, in April 1959, NASA presented 7 military test pilots with degrees in engineering to the world as the Mercury 7, America's first astronaut group. For many people, it makes sense to assume that this public debut of the astronaut would also signal the origin of the field of space medicine. But this is not the case. In April 1959, space medicine research had already been happening for over a decade. Space medicine research began not at NASA in the late 1950s, but in the late 1940s within the US Air Force as a military project. In the immediate aftermath of World War II, scientists working for the US Air Force in the field of aviation medicine were interested in extending their work on pilots to the futuristic idea of the astronaut. They argued that their current work of keeping Cold War pilots alive high in the stratosphere was already functionally similar to spaceflight, requiring a totally sealed artificial environment. In 1949, the US Air Force established the world's first Department of Space Medicine to explore the medical challenges of spaceflight. The new Department of Space Medicine was located at the US Air Force's School of Aviation Medicine, which is a research and teaching facility located in San Antonio, Texas. Right from the start, Air Force scientists identified that spaceflight would present many hazards to the human body. These included intense G-forces of rocket launch and re-entry, breathing thin, low-pressure atmospheres that were artificial, temperature extremes, radiation exposure, and of course the strange, disorienting state of zero-G, or weightlessness. They also foresaw psychological hazards, including isolation, confinement, and monotony. So 10 years before NASA debuted the Mercury 7, the Air Force's Department of Space Medicine was up and running. Now, the person that the Air Force chose to lead the Department of Space Medicine was a man who later became known in the US as the father of space medicine. And he was a German medical doctor and physiologist named Hubertus Strughold. We see him here. During World War II, Strughold served as director of the Luftwaffe's Aviation Medicine Research Institute in Berlin. And despite his knowledge of and connections to heinous, lethal human experiments on children and concentration camp prisoners, Strughold was recruited to the US as part of Operation Paperclip. Most of you probably know Operation Paperclip was a secretive program run by the OSS, the precursor to the CIA, to bring roughly 1,500 German experts from defeated Nazi Germany to work here in the United States. Now, when most people think of Operation Paperclip, their mind instantly goes to the famous rocket designer, Wernher von Braun, and his team of engineers who ended up in Huntsville, Alabama, working for the US Army and later for NASA. They created NASA's most famous rocket, the Saturn V, which propelled Apollo astronauts to the moon. But Operation Paperclip also included medical doctors, physiologists, and psychologists. And under Strughold, at the Air Force's Department of Space Medicine, these German experts went to work, not on the rocket, but on the astronaut, the human, who would ride inside of it. Strughold organized the very first space medicine symposium in 1950, and it actually took place right here in Chicago, at the University of Illinois at Chicago, just a little ways over across downtown. This picture here shows the early Department of Space Medicine, along with Leonard von Braun, who you can see third from the right there, out having dinner after the symposium at a local Chicago restaurant. If any of you are restaurant historians and can identify this restaurant for me, please do let me know. The symposium also resulted in the very first book about space medicine, titled Space Medicine, the Human Factor in Flights Beyond the Earth, published in 1951 by the University of Illinois Press. I have a copy here in my bag if anyone would like to see it after the talks. Over the course of the 1950s, Strughold directed groundbreaking research into space medicine. They conducted the first ever simulation of a spaceflight where a young airman was sealed inside an airtight capsule for a week. They conducted the first expedition to an extreme Earth analog environment for the purpose of space medicine. This was a 6-week-long expedition to the summit of Mount Evans in Colorado as an altitude acclimatization attempt. They pioneered the process of flying parabolic arcs to experiment with brief moments of weightlessness. They accelerated humans on powerful rocket sleds and lofted them high into the stratosphere in balloon gondolas. They also carried out medical screenings and anthropometric studies of military pilots and other populations of interest. At the time, the US Air Force believed that space would become its domain in the coming years, did not anticipate the creation of a civilian agency like NASA. And their plan for astronauts was not scientists and explorers per se, but rather military men, conducting military missions in space, like reconnaissance or operating weapons systems. The motto that Strughold selected for his Department of Space Medicine was Astronautico Subvenimus, which is Latin for "we support the astronaut." But Strughold and his German colleagues were doing much more than merely passively supporting. They were actively constructing the astronaut as an idea and as a concept through this medical work. Through their studies and simulations and expeditions, they were building up a particular vision of an ideal spacefaring body in mind, a particular vision of who could go to space and whose bodies were right or wrong for the space environment. Then, Sputnik launched, NASA was suddenly created in the summer of 1958, and the new agency lacked medical expertise. So it drew heavily on this decade of military space medicine for Project Mercury and the Mercury 7. Over the 1960s, NASA built its own space medicine capabilities on this military foundation, employing experts trained in the US Air Force. Hubertus Strughold himself never worked directly for NASA. He stayed in the Air Force until he retired in 1968, but the agency held him in very high regard. For example, in July 1969, NASA invited Strughold, as we see here, to be present in mission control in Houston, so the father of space medicine could personally be present for the historic flight of Apollo 11. In the 1960s, space medicine at NASA expanded from basic research to include clinical care for astronauts before, during, and after their space flights. Research progressed from ground-based labs and simulations and studies to also include studies conducted in space by astronauts themselves. This started with NASA's Skylab program in the 1970s and grew with the Space Shuttle in the 1980s. Today, on the ISS, space medicine is a primary focus. Astronauts study their own bodies, measuring how the zero-G weightless environment weakens bones, shrinks muscles, and alters blood circulation. They also test countermeasures like exercising on a treadmill to mitigate these effects. In 75 years, space medicine has evolved from theory to practice, from military to civilian contexts, and from ensuring survival on short flights measured in hours or days to supporting long-duration missions measured in months. Initially, space medicine's focus was on the bodies of military pilots, leading to a bias towards healthy white men as the norm for space. However, the types of people venturing into space have diversified. In the 1950s, space was a military domain, so the first astronauts were military pilots. But in the 1960s, space became increasingly about science and exploration, leading NASA to include scientists and medical doctors as astronauts. Of course, it wasn't until 1978 that NASA first selected women and visible minorities to join the astronaut corps. Recently, commercial spaceflight has introduced new types of space travelers, including wealthy tourists and their chosen companions, flying with companies like SpaceX, Blue Origin, and Axiom. What space is for heavily influences who space is for. And new uses of space create new types of spacefarers and present new challenges for space medicine. A good example of this is NASA's Artemis program, which is working towards establishing a permanent presence on the moon. Future Artemis missions could have humans spending more time in space and further from Earth than ever before. Astronauts living and working on the moon, or one day even on Mars, will face new medical challenges, including increased radiation exposure and the hazard of breathing fine dust particles from the surface regolith. But what does any of this have to do with Canada? What explains this exhibit's focus on Canadian space medicine? Now, when we think of Canada's contributions to space, one of two things probably comes to mind. Either the Canadarm family of giant robotic arms used on NASA's space shuttles and now on the ISS, or the musical stylings of Canada's most famous astronaut commander, Chris Hadfield, who famously covered David Bowie's Space Odyssey while in orbit. But Canada is also a global leader in space medicine, a specialization that has a surprising origin story. It starts over 100 years ago, back in 1921, with a seemingly unrelated medical milestone. It was in 1921 at the University of Toronto, where medical researchers Frederick Banting and Charles Best discovered insulin. For their discovery of this life-saving treatment for diabetes, Banting was awarded the Nobel Prize for Medicine and Physiology. Banting leveraged this success to establish his own research institute at the University of Toronto, initially focused on cancer research. However, in 1938, with the looming threat of war in Europe, his British colleagues persuaded Banting to pivot towards aviation medicine, vital for new high-altitude, high-speed fighter aircraft. Banting's institute tackled problems like the lack of oxygen, low temperatures, and something new that the pilots themselves were calling blackout. Blackouts were occurring when fighter pilots performed high-speed turns or pulled out of steep dives. They would lose consciousness, black out, and crash and kill themselves. This was due to G-force, centrifugal forces that pull blood away from the head towards the lower half of the body. Banting gave the task of solving blackout to another cancer researcher named Wilbur Franks, who we see here. Together, Banting and Franks constructed a new top-secret human centrifuge to reproduce this effect by spinning human subjects into unconsciousness. At the time, it was the only operational human centrifuge in North America. This led Wilbur Franks to develop the first anti-G suit, a special garment now worn by fighter pilots and astronauts that squeezes the lower part of the body to maintain blood flow to the brain and therefore consciousness. Sadly, Banting didn't live to see his suit in action. He died in December 1941 when his plane crashed in Newfoundland on his way to England to test a prototype of the flying suit. The Franks flying suit, as it came to be known, saw action starting in 1942 and is considered one of the early forerunners of the modern spacesuit. Banting's death did not halt momentum. Canada continued to advance in aviation medicine during World War II and into the Cold War, eventually combining this research with Arctic and underwater research under the umbrella of environmental medicine. Here we can see a modern-day human centrifuge located in Toronto at DRDC, Defense Research and Development Canada's laboratory there. With the space age, Canada recognized the prohibitive costs of an independent space program. So instead, leaders decided to specialize in robotics, like Canadarm, and space medicine, given their running start in aviation medicine, and to trade this expertise with NASA for access to space. This strategic partnership is exemplified by the Canadian Space Agency's close collaboration with NASA on the Space Shuttle program, the International Space Station, and of course the Artemis program. Canada's first astronaut, Marc Garneau, who you see here on the far right, flew on the Space Shuttle in 1985, bringing with him Canadian space medicine experiments focused on space adaptation syndrome. Space adaptation syndrome is a form of something like motion sickness or disorientation that many astronauts have to contend with while adjusting to arriving in a weightless environment. Dr. Roberta Bondar, who you can see here, my hero growing up, followed in 1992 as the first Canadian woman in space and the first neuroscientist from any nation to fly in space. She conducted further research on the syndrome. Since 1985, 9 Canadian astronauts have flown on 17 NASA missions, with nearly half of our astronauts being medical doctors or medical researchers. This emphasis on selecting and flying medically inclined astronauts reflects Canada's historic emphasis on aviation medicine and space medicine. This tradition, stemming from Banting's discovery of insulin all the way back in 1921, underscores Canada's significant yet often overlooked contributions to space medicine. Now, this exhibit was initially designed in 2018 to coincide with David Saint-Jacques, the most recent Canadian astronaut's flight to the International Space Station. David served on the ISS for 6 months from December 2018 to June 2019. As a medical doctor specializing in emergency and remote care, his mission highlighted Canada's expertise in space medicine. The Canadian Aviation and Space Museum in Ottawa commissioned and developed this exhibit to showcase and raise awareness of Canada's long-standing global leadership in space medicine. And finally, now is the perfect time for international audiences to learn about Canada's space program. Next year, NASA's historic Artemis II mission will carry a crew of 4 astronauts around the moon, including a Canadian astronaut, Jeremy Hansen. On Artemis II, Jeremy Hansen will earn the distinction of being the first non-American to depart Earth orbit into deep space. So when Artemis II launches towards the moon, and there's a spotlight on Jeremy and the Canadian Space Agency, you can think back and remember this exhibit about Canada's proud tradition of space science and exploration in partnership with NASA. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Dr. Devlin. It was very, very interesting and greatly appreciated. It's now my pleasure to introduce to you Michael E. Harrison. He's an MD, PhD, Master's of Public Health, Chief Medical Officer of the Hercules Medical Group. He's an aeromedicine specialist, critical care specialist, emergency medicine physician, and is at the Mayo Clinic in Jacksonville, Florida. Dr. Harrison is the Chief Medical Officer, as I indicated, of Hercules Medical Group, a Texas-based entity specializing in providing full-service medical care and some consultation to Axiom Space and their astronauts. With a background in aerospace medicine and over 12 years of experience, Dr. Harrison also serves as the Chief Medical Officer for Axiom Space, advising the company's management on all aspects of human health and safety and providing a risk analysis for nominal commercial space flight missions. His expertise includes research in spaceflight, military aviation, decompression illness, and high altitude physiology, with 45 peer-reviewed articles in these areas. Currently practicing in Jacksonville, Florida, Dr. Harrison holds a medical degree from the Saba University School of Medicine in the Netherlands and a PhD in exercise physiology from the University of Regina in Canada. In addition, he is a fellow of the Aerospace Medical Association, a nitrox certified rescue diver, and instrument rated private pilot. And I might also add, Dr. Harrison, that as perhaps we told you, in August, on August 15th, we will open an anesthesiology exhibit in collaboration with the Mayo Clinic representatives in Rochester, Minnesota. So we do have a relationship with Mayo. We welcome you to the podium.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you very much for the opportunity to be here. It's a pleasure and an honor. Axiom is very excited to be a participant in tonight's event. Upstairs on the fourth floor, when you start wandering around, you will see our space suit, or my space suit actually, not a space suit, flight suit. For my role as a flight surgeon on our most recent mission, Axiom 3, that flew and landed early this year, launched in January and landed in February. We are a company that is providing commercial space services to the International Space Station, designing the next generation of low Earth orbit space stations, the Axiom station. The first module will launch in 2026, and designing the suit that Jeremy Hansen wears, or the Artemis astronauts will wear when they return to the moon on Artemis 3. So I'm going to give you an overview, having followed along with Dr. Bim's how we got to where we are. I'm going to give you the where we're going next in space with the advent of commercial space. So what I want you to see here are the dates. Don't pay too much attention necessarily to the events, but look at the trajectory of these dates, right? 2020 or 2010 to 2015 to 2018. And then we start seeing multiple events in the years after that, right? There are multiple events in 2020, multiple events in 2021, even more events in 2022. So we're hitting a breaking point in the curve where we're now starting to go exponential in terms of the number of events and the number of firsts that are occurring.
Our online viewers on YouTube can't hear you
at all, right?
Perfect.
So what we are seeing here is that the frequency with which spaceflight is launching from American soil and doing so with non-traditional commercial astronauts is increasing, and will only continue to do so as we gather more and more experience. Since 2020, you've seen numerous launches with humans on board in commercial vehicles, with Demo 2 through SpaceX and NASA, and we're already on Crew 8. And there's an exhibit upstairs with Dr. Mike Barrett's picture. He's a member of Crew 8 and currently on board the International Space Station. So we've done 4 missions in that 4-year, or 8 missions in that 4-year time period. Axiom has done 3 missions with our crews. And some of the things that our crews are doing are pretty exciting. I'm going to show you some of those slides. There have been a number of firsts that have occurred in those 4 years since 2020. We've launched the first commercial mission with all private astronauts that was docked and spent 14 days in the International Space Station. We've had the first commercial mission that's been commanded by a female commander. We've introduced new countries to the advent of spaceflight. Turkey flew on AX-3. The Kingdom of Saudi Arabia flew on AX-2 and brought the first female Saudi astronaut into the space race. There have been private missions that have had repeat flyers, and you can see that when social media got a hold of Mike Lopez Alegria's flight on AX-3, they had some fun in terms of how they represented it, but he was the first repeat flyer on the Dragon. And so it was a reused rocket with a reused capsule with a reused commander, according to the folks on Facebook. But very, very exciting. We flew an agency astronaut in Marcus Vaughn through ESA, flew with us on AX-3 as well. So a number of firsts, and there are going to be more firsts over the next 5, 10, 20 years that will be very, very exciting to watch. Our mission at Axiom is to build for beyond. And so these are our mission statements and our visions. We want to make space accessible for all, and we want to make the endeavors that we accomplish while we're up there have benefit for humanity here on Earth globally, so that everybody can experience the benefits of spaceflight. And you got a history lesson from Dr. Bim about some of those things that we have done in the past and how they've come back to benefit human spaceflight. So over the next 20 years, what we do through commercial space and low Earth orbit is going to have a big impact on folks here. And as a physician unbiased, I'm hoping that has a big impact on health and healthcare provision here on Earth. So we're doing it through a 3-pronged phase. And so we're currently transitioning between phase 1 and phase 2 right now at Axiom. That we have done our private astronaut missions. We've done 3. We've got a 4th one lined up for later this year. And we plan to do more beyond that. We're also building the first commercial space station. And we will fly the first module of that in 2026, attach it to the ISS, and then continue to build on it using the support of the ISS. When the ISS is decommissioned, then we will separate, and we will have a free-flying space station that then becomes a platform for countries and organizations around the world to use it for our benefit. And that can be research and science, and that can also be manufacturing. The sky's the limit, pardon the pun, in terms of what your imagination is and what the benefit of operating and performing in a microgravity environment can provide in terms of either efficiency, advances, and again, they have benefits for folks here on Earth. We have a display upstairs on our spacesuit, so I encourage you to go read that closer instead of spending a whole lot of time with the eye chart here. But this is the Artemis suit that we are going to provide to NASA no later than August of 2025 for them to use for the Artemis missions returning to the moon. It's the first time in 40 years that the spacesuit has been redesigned. And so you can imagine the technological advances that have occurred in that 40-year period that we are now incorporating into our spacesuit. If you watched the unveiling of the suit about a year ago, you heard the oohs and the ahs in the audience when you watched the person inside do a demonstration to reach up above their head. That level of shoulder mobility has not been possible inside a spacesuit until now. So things like that are extremely exciting. The missions that we've flown to date, I'm proud of this one in particular as a Canadian, because as you can see, there's a Canadian flag on the mission patch. Mark Pathy, Canadian resident of Montreal, Quebec, was one of the first crew members on board this mission. And you can see a number of partners. So they went up and they performed a great number of science experiments and payloads and research endeavors and science outreach and motivated children around the world. And they did that for a number of partners. Some of them you can see some Canadian content on there, the Canadian Space Agency, McGill University, University of British Columbia in Calgary, Western University in Ontario. There was an Israeli crew member on board as well, Eitan Stibi, who had a similar outreach and impact on the country of Israel. And it was the first time that Israel had returned to space since the Columbia mission that ended in disaster, unfortunately, in 2003. So we are inspiring other countries and getting other folks involved in the space game. This is AX2, where we started to transition to flying governmental astronauts. And so the model of just ultra-high net worth individuals being the only ones that can benefit from commercial space is not what we're doing. We're providing opportunities for new countries and new governments to create space programs and to do so with their own interests at heart. And so the research that we performed on this flight was heavily influenced by the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and their priorities. And you can see a number of partners there. Again, we continued the pattern, 20 STEAM outreach events, a number of science payloads that were performed. And again, we introduced a new individual, a new first to space with, you can see here, Ray Barnawi was the first female from the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia to fly to space. The mission was commanded by Peggy Whitson. As I mentioned, it was the first commercial mission with a female commander. Peggy Whitson is a legend in spaceflight, having a very extensive and very successful career at NASA. So thrilled to get to work alongside individuals such as this. This was AX3, our third mission, launched in January and landed in February. And in this case, we moved to all governmental astronauts. So the Republic of Turkey had a selection campaign that we participated in, and they selected their first 2 astronauts. One flew on this mission, and the other is going to fly next week on Virgin Galactic's last flight with their current spaceship, G7. And so you will meet Tuba Altasivir as the next first into space from Turkey. In LA, was also a NASA astronaut. Michael Bezalagri was the commander, and was the first person to repeat flying on the Drag. Elber Cezarocci in the middle from Turkey. And then from Italy, we had Walter Billigan, who flew as a member of the Italian Air Force. So again, more firsts and more new horizons in terms of what a commercial astronaut might look like. And you see again, we've got a long list of partners in which we engage in research, outreach events, and motivational events for children around the world. So what we're doing in terms of supporting these folks as a medical department in a commercial space organization is we're working off of this matrix. This is a traditional matrix that you'll see at an aerospace medicine presentation, where we have a look at physiology and the environment. And in most cases, we are sending people with very normal physiology traditionally, right? The astronauts that were selected as part of the Mercury 7 and every astronaut campaign, selection campaign since then by NASA, they're selecting folks who are very healthy, they're buying down risk, so they're doing that intentionally, right? When you get 12,000 applications for 8 positions, you're going to pick the best, and that's across the board, including from a health perspective. So we have traditionally spent very normal physiology into the abnormal environment of space, whether it's the extremes in temperature, the lack of gravity, the pockets of CO2 because of the changes in the way air convects in the microgravity environment, the hypobaric environments that they go through to get there, to open the door into a spacewalk. So we've been very careful in terms of who we've selected to do that. What we're doing at Axiom Space is we're trying to expand that. 30% of the population has got mental health disorders. Diabetes is incredibly prevalent, but nobody with diabetes has ever flown into space. If you look at some of the selection criteria for some of the professional astronaut organizations, you'll see things like asthma on there as a disqualification. And from a commercial space perspective, that's unacceptable. That's something that we can accept the challenge of coming up with a way to make it space accessible to folks like that. So it used to be how healthy do you have to be to go to space to be selected for that opportunity. Through commercial space and Axiom Space in particular, we're asking the question of how sick can you be and still go to space and do so in a safe way. And so that's where we come in. And some of the technology that has been developed in support of spaceflight up until now will be the backbone of what we do. But now we're going to start iterating upon that and taking advantage of being a commercial organization. We can be nimble, and we can be inventive, and we can be quick in terms of how we iterate and make advances. So this is one of my favorite pictures of me with my 3 children. And this was the night that Crew 1 launched. So the very first long duration flight on the International Space Station at the time I was under contractor for another space company. But my daughter, you see there, is wearing a sleeper that looks like the Dragon spacesuit. And she's the one that's super excited about space. It was probably one of her first words, space. But for my kids, this is going to become normal. And for our children and our grandchildren, spaceflight is going to become as routine as getting on board an airliner and flying across the country or across the world on vacation. And that is an extremely exciting thing, and that is not that far off. I hope that we will be able to see that in the next 10, 20, 40, 50 years. So that is coming, and that is what commercial space is doing, and the benefit will be felt by all of us. Thank you.
Dr. Harrison, thank you. Thank you very much for another stimulating presentation. I next introduce to you Dr. Shane Ferrator from Virtual Incision. Dr. Ferrator has a PhD, an MS, he holds a doctorate and master's degree in mechanical engineering from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, and is currently a faculty member at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. Prior to his work at the university, Dr. Ferrator studied at the Kennedy Space Center, Goddard Space Flight Center, and the Jet Propulsion Laboratory. Dr. Ferrator holds over 170 patents and has published over 140 peer-reviewed articles in the field of robotics. With Dr. Ferrator, it's my pleasure to present the podium to you.
Thank you. Very happy to be here tonight and very happy to be part of this exhibit. We just made a surgical robot that went to space. We're in the Museum of Surgical Science, and we have an exhibit on space medicine. So we're the center of the Venn diagram of the intersection of all those things. So we can figure this out. Sure looks like that arrow advances it, but it doesn't. It advances a lot. So we have a little startup company called Virtual Incision. It's in Lincoln, Nebraska, and we make this little robot for surgery. This device is actually inserted into the body during surgery. So during laparoscopic surgery, they actually plate you. And I always say it's like they place a salad bowl on your belly. There's a little bit of space, lift the abdominal wall up, and that gives us room to insert this robot on the inside. The robot's made like you and I are. We've got the right hand and the left hand, and then there's a camera that looks left and right, up and down in here.
So it's like we've shrunk the surgeon down and actually put them inside the patient. That's going to directly address the surgical target. The camera is removable, it can be used separately. And it's different than other surgical robots. Other surgical robots that are out there in use weigh 2,000 pounds, and they're literally 9 feet tall. They're very, very big machines. This is a totally different approach to robotic surgery. This has been a long research project with us. I guess I should point out, we also make the console. The robot doesn't do surgery by itself. It's actually controlled by the surgeon via the console. This introduces this idea of telesurgery. The surgeon's at the console controlling the robot, and the robot's with the patient. I mentioned that we have the startup company in virtual incision where we're building these devices, and I have to report on February 23rd, we received marketing authorization from the Food and Drug Administration, which is a big deal for us, so I have a slide about it. But I always point out that the application was about 35,000 pages to be approved, so it's a big deal. We had a 30-patient clinical trial that went really well. So again, just to show that our robot's a little bit different, it operates underwater. It's used just like this. Most robots are draped and covered to keep them sterile, but our robot is sterilized and used just like this. Lots of steps like this we do to kind of simplify the use of the device. The fish, by the way, are very easy to catch. And our little robot's really strong, so we made a little video to show how strong it is. That's, again, important to surgeons. But I want to tell you tonight about a little mission we just completed. And we made a device called Space Mirror to separate us from the clinical surgical side of the United States. Yes? Louder. Louder. So let's talk about this first of all. So we did a lot of testing. This is our experimental design. You can see this upstairs on the 4th floor, actually. This is called an express wrap locker, which is a NASA box that's holdover from the shuttle program, but it's a microwave-sized box that you put standard experiments in, they go up, they get installed, they bring them back down. It's just a standard box for that. So we had to make our robot just a little bit shorter so that it would fit inside diagonal of the box. But then we had simulated surgical tissue, which are rubber bands between you and me, but we had a fancier name for them. And we wanted to show that we can do dissection on orbit. So we can grab tissue, provide some tension, and then you can dissect the tissue with your scissors on orbit. So this is our experiment that we designed. Lots of testing, of course. I always like to show the students that are involved in all this research and supporting this. That's an on-orbit picture of our system installed in space. They provided us with a picture so we can check some things out. And if you have a video of your robot being launched to space, I would probably include it in every presentation I ever give the rest of my life. Because, it's pretty cool. Did we go past that? Have you seen the launch? Thank you for playing that. So we launched January 30th on Falcon 9. I realized we have some overlap with you guys at the time on the station here. So we got to go down and see the launch, and the landing of that stage 1 booster is as cool as it looks on TV. It's pretty amazing to with us. So, we were aboard Northrop Grumman Cygnus cargo capsule, and we were installed on the International Space Station. So here you can see astronaut Laurel O'Hara is installing our device in the express rack. She's the robotics expert on the space station, so again, there seems to be a lot of Canadian excitement here. So she's the one driving around Canadian too, I guess. But we really didn't ask much of the astronauts. If you look, there's a yellow knob and a red knob. They attach power and they attach Ethernet to that, and they really turned our system on. And our experiment really had 2 phases. We had to do a little, open the locker and do a little checkout here inside there. She checked some connections for us. The first stage, we have a pre-programmed path. So let's just get some rubber bands cut while we're on the space station, and we have a pre-programmed path to kind of give a bird in the hand. I'll show you that experiment here next. That's happening here on the right. So as soon as she turned it on, the robot started to execute the task, and you can see that it'll grab the simulated tissue, it'll provide some tension, and then it'll dissect that tissue. So again, simulated surgical task. This was just stage one. This was our bird in the hand. The second stage was much more ambitious. We wanted to control the device from here on Earth and be able to perform surgical tasks while it's on orbit on the space station. So let's move on to that one here. So we created our own little mission control in Lincoln, Nebraska. We have a row of engineers in the front. We have a row of surgeons in the back. And way in the front left, you can see a surgeon sitting at a console. That image up there is from on orbit, and they're controlling the device from here on Earth. Some standard views of the space station and what's going on there. And then NASA provided the loss of signal information. We had to be cautious of that, of course. These are our 6, we call them astrosurgeons, that perform tasks from Lincoln. So I point out Dr. Bianco first because he's the University of Illinois, Chicago here in town. Dr. Fong's from Los Angeles, 2 Nebraska surgeons, Houston and New Jersey. So we had folks from all over come and execute this. This is the first time a surgical device like this has ever operated in space and been controlled from space. So here's just a little video of our mission operations. Dr. Jobst is controlling that robot again. It's on the space station, and you can see he's performing those dissection tasks using these hand controllers. You can, of course, see the camera being moved around, so you can look at different locations. And this was really a technology demonstration. We wanted to show what's possible. And of course, you guys know the space station can be 250 miles above you, or it can be 8,000 miles on the other side of the Earth. And we operated for about 2 hours. It takes 90 minutes or so for you to spin around that through that full cycle. So the device was quite far away frequently, and there was a lag introduced from the communications protocols. And that served as a bit of a challenge, but we were very excited because all 6 surgeons were successful in performing these tasks that we had for them. So Dr. Fong was very excited. And our device, we have a historical photo of our device with astronaut O'Hara. And it's returned to Earth. Actually, astronaut O'Hara is returned to Earth, she has. And our device is returned to Earth, but we don't have exactly that yet. And sometimes I give presentations at lunch and I try to struggle through the surgery videos, but this is a surgery hard group. I would just want to point out another experiment we just did. The point of the NASA mission was to demonstrate the technology, what's possible here on Earth. So May 1st, we had a surgery between the University of Illinois, Chicago and Lincoln, Nebraska. We had 4 surgeons in Nebraska and we had 4 surgeons in Chicago. We did 8 procedures that day. The Chicago surgeons operated on a patient in Lincoln and vice versa. This is research stuff and it's not human patients, but really, really excited about this. If you think about surgery in rural environments, a general surgeon in a small town that has to do a colectomy, but you really like to have a colorectal surgeon help you with that. You could have a specialist dial in and assist you with the surgery. We've always received funding from NASA and the Army because NASA and the Army both want to do surgery in crazy places, forward environments for the Army. So I always also think about, if you're in a car accident in a rural area and you rupture your spleen in a car accident, you're just trouble. Things could go poorly here. So it'd be nice to provide surgical care as far forward as you can. And if you can enable telesurgery, we think that's a big, big win for the future. We think we've demonstrated it now on the International Space Station. And what makes it all possible really is the fact that this is a small robot that can be moved anywhere. And you can forward deploy it in a lot of environments. So really excited to be doing this work and excited to be part of this exhibit. So anybody that wants to talk robots, I'll talk to you later.
Do you have a question?
I just have one quick question. What would the cost of that be to a rural area that would benefit?
So we think this can be cost parity with current technologies. So if you're having, we think it'll be more costly to move the patient or move the surgeon from place to place. We think we can do this for the same prices that current surgeons are done. So if you can allow that patient to stay in their own environment, stay at home, stay with family, those are big wins in those areas and those situations. So it's small, it's simple, and we think will eventually be less expensive.
Thank you very much.
Is that a sample I can take home with me?
Thank you, Dr. Fairclough. Very stimulating as well. Thank you, sir. The next speaker is the Honorable Daniel S. Gould, who is an entrepreneurial and scientific visionary with the distinction of serving as NASA's longest tenured administrator. His mission in life is quite simple. I want to help people, quote unquote. And that's terrific. The Honorable Daniel S. Golden is, as I indicated, an entrepreneurial scientific visionary with the distinction of serving as NASA's longest tenured administrator. Is this on?
That's you you're talking about.
Thank you, Mr. Longest tenured administrator from April 1992 to November 2001, reporting to 3 United States of America presidents. That's President H.W. Bush, President William Clinton, and President W. Bush. He is credited with the reemergence of NASA, the National Aeronautics Space Administration, after the Cold War, as he diplomatically fostered East-West international cooperation and oversaw the redesign, construction, and initial operation of the $120 billion International Space Station, as well as guided the initial concept of the James Webb Space Telescope to assure it would see back to the beginnings of creation. As the founder of Coal Canyon, an innovative advisory company, and as a senior advisor to Cerberus Capital Management, his career spans space exploration and science, aeronautics, air traffic management, national security systems, semiconductors, advanced sensors, hypersonics, communication, and artificial intelligence. With his accumulated experience, the Honorable Mr. Golden is a highly sought-after leader in advancing American technologies and businesses. And I had the pleasure of picking him up at the airport today, and he is a very, very interesting gentleman. So, Dr. Golden.
I'm going to have a little change of pace here, and I'm going to talk about why we go to space, what we learn from space, and then finally I'll talk about my experiences in sending astronauts to space. This is a real joy, okay. There have been 618 astronauts that have gone to Earth orbit. I've sent 374 of those astronauts in my tenure at NASA. So 6 out of 10 astronauts have went to orbit, went under my care. Not one of those astronauts had any health problems or any problems with the vehicles that they launched the shuttle 60 times. It's a shame that we don't have the shuttle anymore, but we now have better devices. And I'm going to get into some pretty heavy stuff. And when I decided to take the job, the Cold War had just ended, and I spent 25 years of my career working to take down the Soviet Union. I was in national security operations. And the Cold War ended on New Year's Eve of 1991, when I was appointed NASA Administrator, April 1st of 92. No sooner had I taken the job when President George H.W. Bush said, Dan, I want you to meet with Boris Yeltsin. I spent 25 years working against the Russians, but he was such a forward thinker. He understood the impact of history. And the Western powers made a terrible mistake at the end of World War I, which ended up leading to World War II. So his thinking was, let's see if we could do something constructive with the Russians. It was like an out-of-body experience going to the places that I had targeted during the Cold War. But Boris Yeltsin invited me to go. So as soon as I took the job, it was clear part of the mission was going to be the search for life. In fact, I started a program called Origins. Origin, evolution, and destiny of the universe and life therein. And I knew I was getting into some rather difficult territory because this is a hard subject for many people to deal with. And I'm going to give you some evidence of some of the things we learned from the 5 great observatories that I personally led. So I decided I would meet with the religious leaders of the world just to make sure that there was no concern about the federal government delving into things about the origin of everything, the origin of life. So I appointed Father Minogue, who was at the Loyola University here in Chicago, and I asked him to put together a committee of top religious minds, and we met with religious leadership. And then he, being a Catholic, said, Dan, you need to go meet Pope John Paul II. I have some more room here.
Thank you.
And it was quite an experience. And I'll play out a little bit of it so you can get some of the personality of Pope John Paul II. I met with him, and he had a disease where his fingers would shake, and they gave him a drug every morning, and if they gave him too much, he would fall asleep. Too little, he would shake. And this particular morning, he fell asleep, so I had to meet with him standing up. So I walked into the room, and it was quite interesting. The Pope, his back, he had a bone problem, so his back was like this, and his head was tilted this way. And the Secretary of State of the Vatican was over here. I was standing here. The Pope was here, and I was standing there. So he looked at the Secretary of State of the Vatican, and the Secretary of State of the Vatican said, Your Holiness, I'd like to introduce you to Dan Golden, the President of NASA. Now, I had a question. Do I correct the Secretary of State of the Vatican and tell him I'm the NASA administrator? No, I decided to keep my mouth shut. So the Pope, we hadn't just said anything yet, so he's looking at him, and then he turned and he looked at me. And then he turned backwards and looked at the Secretary of State of the Vatican, and he said, What's NASA? And then he turned to me and broke out laughing. And from that point, he wanted to break the ice because we came from such different polarity, different countries, different religions, different training. He was trained as an actor in Poland. And I got into one of the deepest discussions about the origins of the universe, the origin of life. And I brought with me a montage of evidence, and I'm going to walk you through the evidence so I won't say it in advance. And after a very long conversation, he looked at me, and all I was asking him to say is, Dan, this is okay for NASA to go do it. The church would not really be upset. And he looked at me like this, and he said, Dan, space is revealing, and he walked away. It was. So now let me dig a little bit into the subject of origins. And you'll understand why I gave this preamble in a few minutes. I have here a statement of the talk. It's called Golden in the Web. I'll walk you through the 5 observatories that I presided over. A gamma ray observatory, an X-ray observatory, a UV invisible observatory, that's the Hubble telescope, an infrared observatory, and a very large infrared observatory, the Webb. And the Webb is up there now. It's doing amazing work, which I will walk you through. So how do I switch to the next slide on? There it is. So let's walk through all of it. And let's go through some of the evidence. So here we have the Hubble Space Telescope. And when I got to NASA, the Hubble Space Telescope had an astigmatism. It cost $5 billion, and they had a little annular ring in the main mirror, and it couldn't see. So the first task was to shoot up the barrel of the mirror as it came flying over and get an optical prescription. And after we got an optical prescription, we had to build a contact lens. The contact lens was 1,000 pounds, and if there's people here old enough to know what a phone booth was, it was the size of a phone booth, 1,000 pounds, and we had to put that contact lens on the telescope. We did, and right here is the first picture we got. This is a nebula, which is basically the material that stars form in. It's metallic dust, it's gas, and it's hydrocarbons, and perhaps even some amino acids. We'll get to that in a minute. This is called a star nursery because inside of these clouds, stars are igniting. So we're seeing creation of the ultimate kind just looking at this nursery. Next one. This is an interesting one. This is the Compton Gamma Ray Observatory. I built this while I was an aerospace executive. And this observatory sees in gamma rays. And gamma rays come from dying stars called supernovas. There's a lot of energy there. And it took a picture of the Milky Way. This is our galaxy. And all the action here are dying stars called supernovas, and gamma rays are being emitted. And it gets into some of the deeper science. I don't have time for that today, but I just thought this was a beautiful picture. It was interesting when we launched this. This boom didn't come off. It was hanging from the shuttle out to do a spacewalk. In fact, my career floating from the place. Next one. This is a very interesting one. This is the Chandrasekhar X-ray Observatory. There are different energy particles that take place from different phenomena in the universe. And this is a picture of a singular star that's dying. Stars are being born and stars are dying all the time. And on top of that, it's beautiful. And for the Chandra X-ray Observatory, Chandrasekhar, Again, I did this while I was in the aerospace industry that has grazing X-ray incidence nerves. So I had the joy of figuring out how to grind those nerves while I was running a group of 10,000 people. But it worked. Now, this is the real interesting one. This is the Spitzer Space Telescope. And the Spitzer Space Telescope, it takes pictures in long wave infrared. These are the very coldest objects that are in the universe. And this is something else in this picture, which I'll get to. But the Spitzer Space Telescope found amino acids in interstellar space. Amino acids are the building blocks of life. This happened to be a tryptophan amino acid. There have been other amino acids, and over the last 30 years, we've found 256 complex hydrocarbons distributed all over the universe. And the reason they're able to exist is in the nebula, there's little particles of metallic particles. They stick onto the metallic particles and it blocks the ultraviolet radiation from ripping it apart. So now just think about this. Distributed throughout the universe are complex hydrocarbons, building blocks of protein, building blocks of life. And now I'll come to our own solar system. And when I was 7 years old, my father took me to the Museum of Natural History in the Haiti Planetarium in New York City, and I saw a meteorite. And later on, it was discovered that meteorites have amino acids, the building blocks of life. And there's a lot of debris in our own solar system. And it's thought that the distribution of these organic molecules is what got to Earth. Another clue. On Earth, wherever we find a heat source, like a deep ocean vent or a hot pool, and we have some nutrients in the water, you will find life. So now you have to say to yourself, are we alone? I think the probability is pretty low that we are alone. There's some more information here. One of the objects of these telescopes, namely the Spitzer and the Webb Space Telescope in the Hubble, was look back to the beginning of creation and understand the origin of the universe and the evolution. So this Spitzer Space Telescope worked in concert with the Webb, which I'll get to in a minute, and they took these deep field pictures, and if you see these numbers, 2, 5, 3, 1, I don't see 4. There it is. Those are the oldest stars that we've ever seen, and it's approaching the time that those stars formed. Shortly, a few hundred million light years after the formation of the universe. The universe was formed 13.857 billion years ago, and it came within hundreds of millions of years. So now let me get, I think, we have one more. Let's go to the next one. And this is the Webb. I had the joy while being NASA administrator of doing the conceptual design of that telescope. And everyone was twitchy and they didn't think it was going to work. But it did. And we are a human species that's curious, and sometimes people say, why are you spending money doing that? But part of life is understanding where did we come from and where are we going? And again, this is first light that came from the web, and it came very close to the beginnings of creation. I don't have a whole bunch of time to go into it, but this is what I'd like to tell you. You could go back almost to the beginning of everything with the Big Bang. And in fact, we can actually measure the background reverberations. It's called the background cosmic radiation. And we can see those reverberations, but we can't peer back beyond that. So you have to go with mathematical analysis. But the thought is that everything existed was in something the size of the top digit of my thumb. It exploded, it expanded. We could see the reverberations of that. And now you understand why I spoke to Pope John XXIII. Next slide. Now let's get to exploration and why we need spacesuits and why we need space medicine. We have sent a number of robots to Mars, and this is a picture, I believe, from Spirit or Opportunity, I can't remember which one. Again, I had the chance of overseeing the initiation of those programs that got launched after I left. But when we take a look at pictures from orbit, and when we take a look at some of these pictures, it becomes clear that Mars, with high probability, had an ocean. And this is a sense of what Mars might have looked like. And what happened was Earth and Mars and Mercury and Venus, from the beginning of creation of our solar system about 5 billion years ago, they were initially hot, they started to cool down, and they all became warm and wet with dense atmospheres of carbon dioxide. But a strange thing happened. Mercury and Venus were so close to the sun, it blew all the atmosphere away. Although Venus has a very dense carbon dioxide atmosphere, but it's 700 degrees, not comfortable to live with. I don't know what's underneath the clouds, we'll find out. But Mars is 1/3 the mass of Earth. And Mars, the core cooled down. The thing that keeps the Earth going and keeps our atmosphere is we have tectonic activity. So the volcanoes shoot out carbon dioxide. The carbon dioxide comes down into the ocean. It forms sediment, forms to the bottom. The bottom of the ocean floor moves. It goes down into the earth. The carbonates get absorbed and then get shot out. So the earth is able to have an atmosphere of 14.7 psi. What happened to Mars is it's smaller, so it cooled down faster, and the molten core became solid. The tectonic activity stopped, and the replacement of the carbon dioxide didn't take place, and the solar wind, the sun puts out a wind of high energetic particles, it swept away the carbon dioxide. So unfortunately, Mars doesn't have an atmosphere. Mars has an atmosphere of 1/100th the Earth of the carbon dioxide pressure. Earth is 14.7, it's 0.147 psi. Not very helpful for people to live in. But what it does have is water. Underneath the carbon dioxide ice cap on the South Pole is a huge amount of water, and there's also water in different places and frozen water on the planet. If it was all to melt, Mars would have an ocean 30 meters high. Not bad. So there could be life there. But the question is, this is a lot more difficult than sending astronauts to the Axiom space station. The dilemma is, when you're in low Earth orbit, you're protected by the Earth's magnetic fields, which causes the high energy particles, the galactic particles that come from those big explosions I showed you from the dying stars. Very high energy, they go zipping through your body. But in low Earth orbit, the astronauts are pretty much okay. There's some radiation, it's not too bad. When you get to Mars, when you travel to Mars, the radiation is so intense, you can get a pretty good dose of cancer. You can get a variety of other diseases. So this optimism of going to Mars may be a little overstated. I don't know that Elon's going to go next year, and if he does go, he might not be too healthy. And the dilemma is we can't go to Mars fast. A round-trip mission is 3 years. And now I'll get into some physiology. Having launched all those people to the space station and been deeply involved with space medicine, we know that we could send people to space with the kind of things that these gentlemen talk about. 3 months, you go, you come back, you can pretty well normalize. You may be able to go 6 months or a year, but remember, it's low Earth orbit. It does not have the high energy galactic particles, which it rewrites your DNA. And then there are some other problems that you have when you go to space. We take gravity for granted. Gravity takes the blood and it puts a pressure, the blood's down on my feet. Now if I go to space, there's no gravity. What's going to happen? The blood goes to my brain. And it changes the way the heart pumps, and instead of being an oval, the heart becomes a sphere. It's much less efficient. So when people make all these statements, we know what we're doing, we know where we're going, we are about the 2% point on the understanding of how to send humans to space responsibly. And we also are projecting a little bit too far when we say if we could go to low Earth orbit, we could go to the moon and Mars. One of the things I worry about is the amount of money. I know it was wonderful what the Canadians are doing and the pioneering work they have, but the fact of the matter is the medicine that has to be done responsibly is such a small fraction of the space program. And then you think about what happens if we do gene splicing? What happens if we use some of these new artificial intelligence tools? So one of the things that my successors are going to have to think about is how do we balance the budget and responsibly put things into things that Axiom can't afford to do. These are the way out things that governments need to do in terms of dealing with the kind of health problems we're going to have. Because there's abundance out there, and now I'll give you a little bit more information and I'll shut up. Goldman Sachs said the first trillionaire on Earth is going to be the person that mines the near-Earth asteroids. Because if you go to the near-Earth asteroids, you don't have to fall into the gravity well of the moon, albeit it's less than Earth, but you have to fall and it takes energy and you have to come out. In Earth orbit, in orbit about the sun, a little bit beyond the orbit of Earth, there are a measurable amount of rare metals, gold, platinum, silver. There are rare earths. There are metals that are crucial for manufacturing. You can manufacture there in a much more efficient way. So when we start thinking of real manufacturing operations and real commercial space, there are foo-foo commercial operations going to go to the moon because it's all paid for by the government. And maybe a few little advertising things will happen. I know I'm pretty radical, but the point is, the real benefit to humanity is to start mining metals where you don't damage our home planet. And you could make a lot of money, and you could manufacture products. I'll give you a few more facts. You can't stop once we get started. The reason you want to manufacture in space is there's no sedimentation, because there's no gravity. When you go to melt things, you could get differential sedimentation of impurities. In space, there's no sedimentation because there's no gravity. On top of that, on Earth, we have convection. Hot air rises. So if you look at any manufacturing process, because of convection, you get impurities in the products. So ultimately, it can happen in 25 years. There will be trillionaires. There will be manufacturing operations in near Earth orbit, much more so than the moon. And in doing that, we'll be able to go to Mars. Thank you very much.
Great.
Dr. Golden, thank you very, very much. You did exactly what you said you were going to do, and we are all the beneficiaries of your remarks, so thank you. I now introduce you to my boss, who is the chairman of the board of directors of the International Museum of Surgical Science. I will add a couple of comments. He's a terrific person, and I think he must have been an absolutely, and still perhaps is, surgeon as well. I've heard many, many stories from him when traveling with him, and he also has given back a lot. So, Dr. Dieter, I present the podium to you.
Thank you, Magnus. I don't know whether I can follow what I just heard. I always wanted to go to the moon, and now he's telling me I shouldn't. I should go someplace else where the money is. Where do you start? We've got a great panel. We've had some excellent presentations. We have people in the crowd here. I'm sure there's questions that you'd like to ask. But I'm going to take you one or two steps. First, this has been a great week. Memorial Day, we stop and think. And then shortly after that, the Battle Hymn of the Republic brought tears to my wife and I's eyes. Shortly thereafter, our last grandchild, the 18th one, was graduated from grade school. So now we've got to wait for our great-grandkids. And we follow all that with this evening. How can you not enjoy the week or a week such as this? I want to take you back for a moment. And my wife, if she was here, she would already have her hand up that I should quit speaking. But I want you to understand my space involvement. 1960, I was graduating from medical school. And do you need this? Can you hear me without that? No. You don't need it, or you do need it? You do need it, okay. I'll hold it. No, I'll hold it. Anyhow, 1960, I was graduating from medical school. John F. Sheehan was our dean, and he taught pathology. He took a university medical school that was in the heart of the medical center and moved it out to the suburbs. No one ever did that. He joined the VA system, and it's only grown. Just before I finished my senior year, he handed me a big packet. I should tell you, when I went for my interview to go to medical school, I don't remember talking to Dean Sheehan about much of anything, but I do remember talking to the vice dean, and what did we talk about for 30 minutes? Pheasant hunting in Michigan. And I said to him, when he said to me, "Oh, time's up," I said, "What about medical school?" He said, "Don't worry about it, you're in." Okay, so Dean Sheehan hands me the papers at the end of this 4 years. And he said to me, "I want you to go into high altitude physiology." I went east, Marquardt Aircraft Company. I went to medical school right next to them, John Hopkins, and I spoke to both of them. And if I would have pursued what they accepted, I might have been working with you, because both of them accepted me to start a medical program in high altitude medicine. I turned that down. I went to Alaska to do a little fishing. I went into a residency, and I joined another burgeoning field called cardiac surgery. So times change, and where are we at? Here we are this evening. We have some of the finest presentations you could ask for here on the, excuse me, on the agenda this evening. And every one of them, I wish I would have brought a tape recorder and recorded it. Because this is what we're talking about for the future, and for the young people that we would like to see grow into these fields and innovate, develop. Some of you know my age by the fact that 1960 I graduated from medical school. But what I would like to do now in my next, say, 10 years, I'd love to go to work with them. I'd love to take on the responsibility and be one of their students and do some of that kind of work. Because this is what we came for, this is what we wanted to hear. A fellow at Loyola University takes students. When I say students, I'm talking about high school students, only this is a professor at a university medical school. And he takes these high school kids, and maybe freshmen or sophomores in medical school, and he gives them chores to do that some of them I've never done. But he turns those individuals into speaking, into growing into the future. So I think that Max and Jennifer and everyone here in this room appreciates the future that we've just heard. Thank you all.
Well, first of all, panel, thank you very much. As I said at the beginning, we are truly humbled, but we're truly privileged to have a panel comprised of all of you. So thank you, sincerely. I believe that we have, and first of all, on the second, Michelle, thank you. Kudos to you. I think that now we have picture taking and ribbon cutting. And we're going to do the ribbon cutting here, and then we'll go upstairs and see the exhibits. And then after you've seen the exhibits, you can come back downstairs and have some food. We're running a few minutes behind, but I think it was well worth it, to be honest with you. So, Michelle, do you want to take over here and do the photography and so forth?
Thank you so much. If you'd all like to stay for our ribbon cutting, we will have all of our presenters stand up here together for us, and we're going to cut the ribbon to officially open the exhibit. But you are all free to also have more food and drink, and the exhibit is on the 4th floor. And we'll have the photographer come to take our photos. But thank you all so much for coming and being a part of this. Thank you.
Roy, take your, remove it? Yeah. I thought you take one,
Surgical museum, the real, I could go. Why don't you do the honors? Why don't you do it?
Yeah, this is perfect. Yeah.
All right.
Please look up.
They need to be oiled. Come on.
We would love to. Probably. Well, everyone goes.